Hello, welcome to chapter 1, part 2. I see you haven't decided to quit this course yet. That's really great. Excited to have you here, and let's just keep going. Let's jump right back into it. So remember what we've done so far. We talked a little bit about what are the two big questions of economics, what's kind of the difference between micro and macro, and sort of what do we even do? What are we trying to do at the end of the day as economists? Now, I'm going to start talking about in this lecture the economic way of thinking. How do we approach questions? Because we want to, instead of thinking with feelings of I feel that this is better, or I feel that that color is better, or I like that, we instead want to take those statements, those feelings, and act like scientists and come in and think, okay, well, how do I make a testable implication? Is this liked 3% more than that other thing in qualitative surveys of college students in between this month and that month? That is a testable implication. We can figure that out. So we have lots of situations like that, and it's something that we're going to try to explain a little bit more of. Now, let's go ahead, screen 2. We got our share going. Yep, let's go ahead and put me down here at the corner. I'm least intrusive there. The economic way of thinking. How do we start building all the pieces that we need to approach questions? This is great because it's something that we're going to be referring back to for the rest of this course. Because every time we get a new concept or idea or strategy that we have to figure out, we have to break it down into how do we think about this, or how do we approach this question? So with the economic way of thinking, we have 6 key ideas. So there's 6 key rational things that we need to think about. First, do I talk about each of these? I do. Is the fact that choices are trade-offs. I could buy pins or tomato timers. I have to make a choice in between the two. And then the second part is people make rational choices by comparing benefits and costs. With this pin, I can grade essays for my national public class. With this timer, I can help myself structure my time management for writing papers, because that's a lot of what professors do, is we do research and we write papers about it. There's benefits to both of these items, and I have to compare these benefits and costs when I'm making some sort of rational choice. Third, benefits are what you gain from something. So if I have this timer, I gain slightly better performance on writing. That is something that I benefit. Okay, then cost, number 4, is something that I have to give up. Well, to obtain this timer, I have to pay, like $10, which is a small portion of my hourly income, but it's a portion of my hourly income. That's something that I have to give up. I have to give up that money, kind of the time and investment that I put into it. So there's a cost. So we have these benefits and we have these costs. Now, number 5, most choices that we make are actually at the margin, right? Let's think about pins. If I have a bunch of pins, I kind of think at the margin of how much benefit would I get from one more? If I have one more highlighter, how much extra benefit am I going to get? How much extra cost is that one more highlighter going to give me? If I want one more pin, because the pin is mightier than the sword, how much is this going to cost me for one more pin? How much benefit am I going to get from one more pin? When we start thinking about this one more mentality, or this how much mentality, that's called thinking at the margin. All right? There's actually a book called Murder at the Margin. It's back from the 1970s. Anyways, it's an economics murder mystery, and it's pretty cool because you go through this entire murder mystery novel, and if you understand economic ways of thinking, then you can figure out like who really did it and why they did it in the background. I might refer to these books a lot because they're really interesting, just series of fun econ murder mysteries if you're bored. Then 6, choices respond to incentives. That's something we've already kind of talked about, right? There might be positive incentives, there might be negative incentives, and thinking about these positive and negative incentives kind of like represent benefits and costs to us, which is going to determine which choice we're going to make when we're making our rational choices. Let's go a little bit deeper into each of these concepts, because they're really important, because this is the basis of how we're going to start approaching problems, right? So in the economic way of thinking, scarcity is at the center of every stage. I do not have more than 24 hours in a day. I only have 24. I do not have unlimited money. I only have the money in my bank account. There are limits. These limits are scarcities. There can be scarcities in resources such as time or money or ability. And because these scarcities exist, I have to make choices. All the way back to our original definition. I'm going to be bringing this up a lot. So we can think about every choice as a trade-off. We're making some sort of exchange. If I have $10 and I can either buy a pack of pins or I can buy a timer, well, if I buy the timer, I'm making the benefit of slightly better writing, but I'm giving up all the pins that I would use from grading. If I instead trade off and I buy a 10-pack of pins, well, that's a lot of papers that I can grade. I can give a lot of good constructive feedback notes with these, but I'm going to give up a little bit of that additional productivity I would have gotten if I had this other item, right? There's a trade-off or an exchange that I'm going to have to make when I'm choosing in between two different types of items. Let's think about a different example. Let's assume that we're in a normal semester, everything's great, and you have the choice on a Saturday night that you can either study or go to a party. Maybe the midterm's coming up, because we have a midterm in about 4 weeks. And the midterm's coming up, and you can either choose to go to a party and meet some new people and maybe play some video games. Maybe there'll be a dog at the party and you can pet the dog. So there might be some really fun parts with that. Or you can study for that hour or two instead, and if you study for that hour or two instead, you might make a better grade because you understand the material better. Well, you can't do both at the same time, unless it's a really lame party. I've been to some study parties. They're not the most hot and poppin' thing that has ever existed, but they're there. But most of the time you can't do both, right? So you're going to have to make a choice. You're going to have to choose to either go to the party, and you're going to give up that little bit of extra you could have gotten on your grade from studying, or you can choose to study. And instead then you have to kind of trade off, and you're giving up that social time that you could have with your friends, or the cool dog that you could pet at the party, right? You have to make your choices in between this, and the way that you do that is by making irrational choices by comparing your benefits and your costs. So a rational choice is one that kind of compares these costs. Okay, how much time is it going to take me to go to the party? Am I going to have to buy a new outfit for it? Like, am I going to be socially exhausted? Is it going to cost me my mental stability to just deal with people for hours on end? Okay, these are costs, but I have these benefits. I get to pet the cute dog, and I get to talk to some friends, and we get to make better networking connections, and maybe someone will give me a piece of cake. Cake's pretty cool. So I have to take these costs and these benefits for every action, and then I have to make a choice with it. We in economics, at least at the stage of economics that we're in, we assume that everybody acts rationally, that they do compare their costs and benefits, and they make a rational choice. Now, later on, if you want to continue into economics and you want to start going into the frontiers of new knowledge, eventually you'll get to the point where you have to start thinking about irrational behavior, right? How do people, I have a friend who ended up doing this experiment. It's really cool, where they ended up just checking the token system in a mental hospital. So there was a mental hospital of people that had different sort of behavioral and mental difficulties. And they started looking at like how people started trading money and goods. And sometimes it wasn't always in the way that we would have rationally expected by consumer theory. That's pretty cool. Those are the sort of things that you can eventually do down the line of economics. But in this class, we're going to assume that most people make rational choices, that they look at their cost and benefits, they weigh the two of them together, and they go with the one that gives them the most benefits over cost. Now, only the wants of the person making the choice are relevant to determine its rationality. It could be that I think, I don't know, polluting the watershed's bad. Because I think that does not mean that the choice is relevant or irrelevant for the person deciding to pollute the watershed. Only that person's choice is really relevant to determining how rational they're being about it. They might end up polluting because they think that they can save more money as opposed to having to go through, oh, my phone's trying to record what I say. Please stop. That's creepy. Instead of going to pay for the landfill to properly dispose of these goods. So that person, the choice that they're making determines the rationality, not how we feel about the choice that they made. So this kind of provides an answer to one of our big questions. Remember, the first question was kind of the what, the how, and the for whom? Well, this answer is part of the what. what goods and services will be produced and in what quantities. So how many tomato timers are there and how much do we produce them for and in what volumes? Well, the answer to that question is the people who will rationally choose to buy it. We produce enough tomato timers to cover all the people that will rationally buy a tomato timer for the price that we want to set. Rational choice. So with these rational choices, we're comparing benefits and cost, right? First part is the benefit. The benefit of something is the gain or pleasure that it brings. So I could be more productive. That is something that I could gain. That's a pleasurable thing to me. I'm very happy about that. That's a benefit. Maybe if you go to a party, you get to pet a cool dog. That could be a benefit to you because it's something that you gain pleasure from, and it can be determined by your preferences. Preferences are just kind of the ordering of your likes and dislikes. I prefer the red pens while grading over the blue pens, and I definitely prefer the blue pens over the highlighter. So in my order of preferences, I would prefer the red pen, but if not available, I would take the blue pen, and if not available, I would grade with the highlighter if I really had to, right? These orders of likes and dislikes and the intensity of these likes and dislikes, these are called preferences. So that's the benefit side. Let's think about the cost side. Cost isn't only money. A pack of these pens might cost me $7.49, or at least they did 10 years ago back when I worked at Staples. But that's how much a 10-pack might cost of these pens. Costs aren't only money, though, right? We also have this thing called an opportunity cost. Now, that's really important. This is the difference between accounting and economics. Accounting looks at money in, money out. Economics looks at money in, money out, and what else could you have done with that time? What else could you have done with that money? It looks at this opportunity cost, the highest value alternative that must be given up to get it. If there are only two goods, and I decide to buy pens, then what I'm giving up, the opportunity cost that I have for buying these pens, is this happiness that I get from the tomato timer. That's gone. That extra bit of productivity, that was my next best alternative, and I gave it up to buy pens. This idea of opportunity cost is really, really important because it's something that we're going to be talking about a lot. You're going to get questions on it. It's going to be in both your homework and your test, and it's something that we're going to refer to in every single chapter. Let's say that you want to go to a live concert. I'm trying to remember who that person who's doing like drive-in concerts are. Anyways, let's say that this is a normal time and there is a Lady Gaga concert. Well, what's your opportunity cost of going to that live concert? Well, your opportunity cost can kind of have two components, right? It's one, the things you can afford to buy if you purchase the concert ticket. So if I purchase a Lady Gaga concert ticket, I cannot afford a Beyonce concert ticket, or I cannot afford, what else would I buy with my time? Gas. Wouldn't be able to buy gas, right? So there are things that I no longer can afford because I'm instead buying this good or service. Okay, that's part one of opportunity cost. Part two are the things you can't do with your time if I attend the concert. So I talked about the other things that I couldn't buy because I spent X number of dollars on a concert ticket. But what about with my time? If I'm going to a Lady Gaga concert and I'm just sitting there just kind of dancing along, right? That means that I'm not recording classes at that time because I can't do multiple things with my time. So I'm giving up what my next best alternative is. Going to the concert might mean that I'm not recording extra videos, or maybe I'm not playing a video game that night because you're just going to learn a lot about me because normally I would talk about myself in class, but I can't do that in an online format. I tend to play a lot of video games. My main ones right now are Dead by Daylight and Elder Scrolls Online. If I decide to go to a concert, that means that I am spending my time at the concert. While the next best thing I could do with my time might be playing a video game. So it's something that I'm giving up. That's my opportunity cost of going to that concert. So we have our benefits, our cost, and then we have to think about the margin, right? Because I can allocate my time incrementally. It's not that I choose to go study or to a party. I can choose to study for an hour or two, and then I can choose to go to a party for an hour or two. I'm making that decision on that incremental amount of time, that idea of one more. Okay, do I study for one more hour, or do I go to a movie? Do I go to the party for one more hour, or do I leave early so that I can get enough sleep before my econ test the next day? You can allocate your time by choosing at the margin, the idea of one more hour, one more pin, one more thing, right? The choice is not all or nothing. It's not that you can go to the party or not go to the party. It's you can go to the party and you might show up late because you're studying, or you might leave early so that you can do your best on your test tomorrow, or you might leave early because people are getting a little too rowdy and you really don't want to deal with the cops that night. These are choices that you're making, and it's not an all or nothing. It's not a party or no party. It can sometimes be a party a little bit or a party a lot of it. And you have to decide how you allocate each activity by thinking on the margin, by thinking a little bit of the next minute or the next hour. To make this decision, you're going to compare the benefits and a little bit more of the costs and how they're allocated through time. That's thinking on the margin. All right, so when you're choosing in between the margin, we have two new terms that you're going to need to know, right? These incremental changes. First is the marginal benefit. Marginal benefit is what am I going to get from one more of these? If I have one pin, I can grade 100 exams. If I buy a second pin, because I'm thinking marginally, right? What's the marginal benefit of this next pin? Well, together, I can now grade 200 tests. But this one pin, the marginal benefit of this one extra pin is an additional 100 tests that I can grade. The marginal benefit is 100 tests. It's just the extra benefit you get from one more or something. Similar to the marginal cost, right? The marginal cost is how much you're giving up for one more or something. This first pin might cost me $1. Okay. And all the time I guess I spend grading. So maybe going to a Lady Gaga concert. The second pin, there's a marginal cost for that. It's also $1. So my cost, my overall cost is $2. My marginal cost for the second pin is $1 because it's the extra little bit that it's costing me for one more, plus the things that I could have done with that time. If the marginal benefit, so the marginal extra bit of like grading that I can do, if that brings me more happiness than the marginal cost of the extra bit of money and what I could have done with that time, if that benefit is higher than that cost, then I choose to do the activity. It's just a really simple equation at the end of the day. It's what brings me the most happiness for the least amount of cost. And we want to think what has the widest amount of marginal benefit over marginal cost in our amount of happiness when we do one more. So if you choose to maybe go to a party for another hour instead of going home to study, well, then you're figuring that your marginal benefit of the social activity and seeing people is going to be more than the marginal cost of losing that extra bit of sleep on your exam. Now, when you're making these choices, you're responding to incentives. There's reasons why you might want to go pet the cute dog, or there might be a reason why you want to buy the red pens instead of the black pens, or there might be some sort of reason for these things. And there's positive incentives and there's negative incentives. So a change in marginal cost or benefit changes your incentive structure, right? I really want to grade tests, and this first pin, I can grade most of the tests. The second pin, I can grade a lot more tests. This marginal difference makes me think about what are my incentives. Do I really want to buy a second pin? I'm going to have to go all the way to the store and spend that time when maybe I can put slightly less comments on every single paper. You know, there are these different incentives that I'm having to choose from because I'm thinking about the cost and benefit. The central idea of economics, the very base core, because we're building the base core and then we'll just keep growing out to figure out the rest of economics. But this base core is the idea that we can predict how choices will change by looking at incentives. If I know that spending an extra hour at the party might be a really great time, you might meet a new pet, you might meet a new friend, things like that, and I understand that that's the benefit that you get, and I know that the cost is only going to be 1.5 points on your midterm grade, I can start to think about why these choices happen by looking at the incentives of them. Incentives are also the way that we kind of start to think about this self-interest versus social interest, because it's something that you have to consider, right? When I decide to drive my SUV, I have to think about what's happening to the environment, and I also have to think about what my happiness is, and I make decisions based upon that. So these are kind of the key parts of figuring out economics. So at the end of the day, what is economics? That was the whole basis of chapter 1. What is economics? Economics is a social scientist, and us as scientists, want to be able to make testable implications so that we can approach them in scientific ways, so that we can think of our economic way of thinking. Oops, I'm going to put my elbow on that. To figure out why choices are made. Okay, so there are two different types of statements. I always ask a test on your midterm about these two different types of statements. I would kind of know them. So one's a positive statement and one's a normative statement. So let's see. Positive statement. Let's start with normative. Normative statements is kind of the expressions, right? But I can't necessarily test it. I feel I need to take hand sanitizer to the store. That is a normative statement. I did not give anything testable there. I just said, like, I feel hand sanitizer at the store is kind of cool, right? Our goal in our little science brains, because we want to be an economist, and economist is a social science, and we take all these opinions and feelings and we want to test them. Then we need to turn these normative statements, the I feel I should take hand sanitizer to the store, and instead turn them into positive statements. Positive statements have testable implications that we can figure out by using facts. By using equations, by figuring out these other things. So a positive statement might instead say, okay, if I take this hand sanitizer to the store, I think it will reduce my chances of getting a flu-related virus or flu-similar virus by, or well, I guess this is kind of for bacteria, isn't it? By giving me some sort of bacterial infection by 92%. I can test that. I can totally test that. I can see what the science says about hand sanitizer and germ transformation. I can see what happens with different sort of bacteria under different types of hand sanitizer. I can see how it would operate in a store environment. When I start saying, instead of I feel I need to take this, to I think this will reduce my risk by 92%, that's creating a different environment. That's creating a testable implication, and that's what we want to do. That's what we're going to do as business scientists, as economists, which is just kind of a social science. So in all this, I want to strongly say that correlation does not imply causation. I think someone, I'm really trying to remember what the study was. It was years and years ago. Someone actually figured out, like, on the day that there are sunspots on the sun, that the stock market did well that day. That is not a cause and effect, right? Sunspots on the sun did not affect the stock market. They just happened to be correlated, where it just happened to be that on days when the sun had these sunspots also happened to be about the same time that the stock market did a little bit better. These are called correlations. Correlations does not necessarily imply causation. That does not mean sunspots cause the stock market, or the stock market doing well cause sunspots. We have to unscramble cause and effect, because sometimes cause and effect isn't there. Maybe these are two completely unrelated things that happen about the same time, but sometimes there is cause and effect. Maybe if we pollute the watershed and there are less butterflies the next year, that is a cause and effect. We can try to test that, right? The task of economics is to, instead of having these normative statements, to have positive statements with testable implications, and we're going to test them. The reason we're going to test them is because we want to unscramble cause and effect. We want to figure out what's actually driving stuff. If trade is going really well in between two countries, why? Which one came first? How did this policy affect it? We wanted to figure out the cause and effect. I work on lots of things. One of the things I'm working on right now is looking at for example, like construction licenses. If the exams are offered in multiple languages, how does that help people? Like, does that help improve socioeconomic status? Does it end up keeping people out of the market? Does it let them into the market? Like, what happens there? So we need a cause and effect of what happens when we allow tests to be given in more languages. What happens to the outcomes of people? We want to figure out the cause and effect. In economics, we're trying to make testable economics models so that we can figure out this cause and effect. So an economic model is just a description of some aspect of the economics world. Now, they can be mathematical, they can be theoretical. There's lots of different ways to approach it. And this, we're kind of just going to talk about like sort of this black box of economic modeling. But let me kind of talk to you about an example. So this is some work that I did a while ago. This was business-related data in the United States on where a whole bunch of businesses were located, and I wanted to find out, did occupational licensing laws, so the skills and the training and the education required to go into certain industries, how does that affect where these businesses located? So I needed to develop an economic model. Well, with that, I ended up taking just all the firms that were really close to a border, so they kind of had a choice. For example, let's say that this is the border in between Missouri and Illinois. If you live in Edwardsville, you know this border quite well, right? Because you go over it, it's over that pretty water. Where do businesses decide to locate? Are they going to be on the Missouri side or the Illinois side? It depends. What's the regulatory environment like? Are businesses happy there? So what I did was I found all the businesses in this area and I kind of saw how likely they were to go to each side. I found out that in places that had really low requirements, you needed less education and you had to spend less money for your license and stuff. Businesses were much more likely to go there than they were to these high requirement areas. What? That's kind of cool. So why do I give you this example? It's not because I want you to know my research. If you want to hear about my research, I will talk until the cows come home. I would love to. But it's because I kind of want to show you that economics isn't all money, right? It's not just figuring out how the stock market is. Maybe it's figuring out, why does a business locate where it is? Why does one particular type of protest group make more impact than another type of protest group? Why are test scores different in a particular school district? Economics answers a lot of these different questions, and we do that by creating models. And these economic models are just testing different sort of positive statements to figure out what's really possible, what's really happening, what's causing or affecting something. So economists use a few different types of models. We have natural experiments. For example, oh my gosh, I'm going to feel really bad if I have the state wrong. I think this was in Oregon. They ended up giving away different types of health insurance through a lottery once, and it was a natural experiment to see if the people that randomly got selected for this type of insurance actually had better health outcomes. That was a natural experiment that just kind of like did this, and we saw what happened with the world. Then there's statistical investigation. That's kind of like what I just showed you. I knew that there were policy differences, so I went and I investigated the numbers, and I tried to see, okay, in between these areas with different policies, what's happening? How do businesses operate? What do they do? I investigated and take a little lens to it, and I'm trying to figure out what's happening in these realms. Then we have economic experiments. These are the really fun ones. If you ever get a chance to take an experimental econ class, I'd recommend it. These are like board games, right? These are taking people into a room and having them play through different situations or different sort of games to figure out, how do people think? And you start to like experiment on how they think. And it's pretty fascinating. For example, I was at Georgia State before this. We had an experimental lab. And sometimes we would bring students in and we'd say, hey, pretend you have a house. Here's information about your house. And we're going to pay you actual physical money if your house does not collapse and you keep it safe. All right, now we've appraised it for this much. Okay, cool. The appraisal changed. You have this much risk of a branch coming across your house. What do? And we just see how people operate. Or we'd see how people cooperate together or how they collaborate. And those are sort of economic experiments. So we have natural experiments, investigations, economic experiments, which can be in a laboratory setting or not in a laboratory setting. And for normative goals, so these sorts of feelings, we want to find a way that we can actually evaluate them by turning them into positive statements with testable implications. And then we test those implications through different types of modeling and different types of cool experiments and different ways of approaching the world. By our economic way of thinking, we go through our logic pattern and we try to figure out, okay, what are the facts? And how do the facts matter? And what does this really mean? And we do that by comparing benefits and costs. And it's really, really cool. I love what I do as an economist. It's so much fun. But let's stop the share real fast. That's the end of chapter 1. I hope that you found this really interesting because this was kind of the background into what is economics, so I can motivate you into the sort of things that we're going to be talking about for this whole semester. I'm really excited to keep working with y'all. This is going to be a lot of fun, I promise. There's going to be interesting topics and debated topics, and there might be days when we have to do a lot of math or a little bit of math, and we're all going to get through it, and it's going to be fun. If you need me at any time, I am available during office hours or by email, so go ahead and just give me a line if you need to, and we can try to help you however we can. Okay, I hope you have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of the semester.